Today is April 6, 2016, and we are interviewing Jeffrey David Hunt. Mr. Hunt is 63 years old. He was born on October 27, 1952. My name is Yooni Kwon, and I will be the interviewer. This interview is being conducted for the Library of Congress. Mr. Hunt, could you state for the record what war and branch of service did you serve on?
I was in the U.S. Army from 72 to 75. It was the end of the Vietnam War, and it was also during the Cold War.
And can you tell us what was your rank?
When I got out of the service, it was Specialist 4th Class.
Where did you serve?
Well, do you want from basic training on, or places I served?
I guess we'll have to start from basic training.
Basic training was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Then after that, I had military police school at Fort Gordon, Georgia. Then I was stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. It was a 17-month tour, but part of that time, about 6 months of that, I was stationed up at Fort Holabird, temporary duty. It was a fort up in Baltimore that they were in the process of closing down. And then my last year was up in Alaska.
Okay, so let's go back to before you were in the military. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was in the last class, group of people who would have been drafted, and I had a low draft number, so instead of waiting to get drafted and being sent who knows where, I figured I could enlist. They had a program, early enlistment. I could actually go in like November, but didn't have to report to basic training until after the first of the year in 1973. So I was in for about 2 months before I actually went to basic training, so I enlisted.
Okay. Where were you living at the time you enlisted?
In Johnstown, Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania.
Okay. Why did you pick to join the Army branch of the military?
To be honest, I'm not really sure. At the time, I was considering a career in law enforcement, and I knew about military police, and I knew that also the Navy had military police and the other branches of service. But I just thought the Army would be the best possible place for me. And if I remember right, they might have been the only branch that was offering this 3-year enlistment and then be guaranteed where you wanted to go for your first deployment after your military police school. Because that's why I picked. Then I went to go to Fort Meade, Maryland.
Do you recall what it was like during your first days of service?
We arrived in Fort Dix, New Jersey in the middle of the night, for one thing. It was cold. It was cold. And then we were in what they call the induction center. That's where you get your hair cut, get all your shots, they check your eye, give you a complete physical, you get your uniforms. Those first couple days were a little hectic. And then you're assigned to a unit for basic training. And at first I thought, well, what did I get myself into here? But I was able to get through it. I had been in Boy Scouts and I'd been involved in track and field when I was in high school, so the physical part of it wasn't that bad, and I knew my way around pretty well. So it was just getting through those 8 weeks of basic training.
Okay, what kind of emotions were you going through as you left for basic training?
Apprehension. I wasn't exactly sure what I had an idea what basic training was about, but I didn't know for sure. So I was a little apprehensive, and I know, luckily I'd met a couple guys from the area where I lived in. I didn't know them before this, and we struck up a friendship, and one of them happened to be in the unit that I was in then, assigned to when I got to basic training. So at least there was something there of familiarity,
Yes.
Somebody from my neck of the woods.
All right. We see many portrayals of basic training in media. They portray it as very tough and grueling. Is that how it was for you?
Yeah, it was. There's no doubt about it. The drill sergeants are constantly on you, yelling and screaming at you, especially when you're marching in formation or whatever, keeping in step. And I think it was so you could get used to what it might be like if you actually ended up in combat or something. They were very hard on us, but then there were times when, if we were doing everything we were supposed to be doing, they'd let up a little bit, So you always had to be on your toes and make sure you were doing, what you were supposed to be doing.
So, do you remember your instructors at basic training?
I remember. I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but I remember a couple. There was one in particular. He was very tough on us, yelling and screaming a lot. Then there was another one who he'd been a drill instructor for a number of years, and when we were marching, we used to march to I don't know if you can call them songs, but he'd say a line and we'd say it back, and it made the time go by when we were marching. I remember him. Everybody says, "Oh, I hope we get Sergeant." And like I said, I can't remember his name now. I hope he's the one that's taking us out to the rifle range or wherever we were headed. Because we knew we'd have a good time. Singing. Back and forth with him on the marches.
Part of your training was at Fort Dix. Fort Dix had a mock Vietnam village set up to prepare soldiers for deployment. Were you there to experience it, and if so, what was it like?
No, we never were exposed to that. I mean, I heard about it, but that was never part of my training, in particular for basic training. At the time, this was 1973. The Vietnam peace talks were in progress at the time, and there was, I think they were thinking the war may be winding down, and I wasn't in infantry or anything like that, so at least I wasn't planning. They knew I was planning to go into the MPs. And so we never actually went through that village. I mean, like I said, I heard about it, but I never saw it.
All right, so where did you go after basic training?
Fort Gordon, Georgia. That's where the MP school was at the time.
Okay, and what made you decide to become an MP?
Well, like I said earlier, at the time I was considering a career in law enforcement, and I thought the MPs would be a good way to get the experience. And then when I got out of the Army, I would have probably gone to the State Police Academy or something like that.
So, okay, what was MP training like?
Pretty much, again, you had drill instructors. They were always on you about different things, but it was more geared toward what we would do as police officers. We had, riot training. We had. We'd have to go out on bivouac. That's where we'd go out in the field in case we were in a combat situation. Learn how to pitch a tent and everything. Luckily, with my Boy Scout training, I already knew how to do that. There's a funny story there. After because they were two-man pup tents basically, and the guy I was with, we pitched a tent and everything. And after we were done, I got my shovel out, and I forget what they call it. They didn't call it a shovel in the Army. I forget what a trench tool I think it was. And I went around the tent digging this trench, and he's going, "What are you doing?" I says, because there was nothing on the ground. It was just, you put the tent up and that was it. I says, in case it rains, the water runs off the tent. You don't want it coming under us and getting our sleeping bags and everything wet. And that was something I had learned in Boy Scouts. And he goes, "Oh, wow, that's pretty neat." Because because he had no idea what I was doing. He saw me digging this trench. And then the other interesting thing about MP school was the Marines. They didn't have their own MP school, so they trained with us. So you can imagine Army and Marines getting together, and the Marines, nothing against Marines, but they always thought they were the better of the services, the tougher one, and so some fights would break out now and then, which made it interesting.
Of course.
But no, like I said, anything, we learned how to subdue if we were arresting somebody with our batons, how to properly put handcuffs on, basically anything you would have to do as a police officer.
All right, so after MP training, where were you sent to next?
Well, because I had gone in under this program, guaranteed 16 months, at least 16 months at a certain base, I went to Fort Meade, Maryland. The reason I had picked Fort Meade, it was far enough away from home, but yet it was close enough that if a couple hours, I could drive back to my hometown when I had time off. So that's why I selected Fort Meade.
And what was Fort Meade like?
It was pretty tame. I mean, we did a lot of. It was an open fort at the time. There were no gates. People. In fact, there was a state route, Maryland state route, that ran right through the fort. And we still had a lot of traffic, duty. We directing traffic in the morning, working at crossings because there were a couple schools on the base for the the children of the servicemen there, and watching the crosswalks, patrolling just like a police officer would. Occasionally we had a break-in one night at an officer's residence when they were out of town, and my partner and I, we went and investigated. Nothing was missing. Somebody next door had seen flashlights, they thought they saw flashlights in the house, and they thought somebody had broken into the house. So we went in and couldn't find anything, and then when the residents came back, we asked them to check, was anything missing? And they said no. And then the National Security Agency building is on Fort Meade, so every so often we'd have to, the Marines guarded that, but every so often we'd have to do a sweep around the NSA building just to make sure everything was okay down there. Like I said, it was basically police duty, and we worked with the Anne Arundel County Police. Maryland, they have county police units instead of each little town having its own, and we worked with the Anne Arundel County police officers.
Right. You were also at Fort Holabird for a time?
Right. Well, I actually ended up 17 months at Fort Meade, but 6 of those months I was put on temporary duty at Fort Holabird. That was a fort that was in the process of closing down, and they had private security watching it, but they wanted to supplement that with MPs, and they came down and they said, we need a couple MPs. I guess it was on a rotating basis because there had been a couple up there, and then they were coming back to Fort Meade, so they needed some more to go up there, and I volunteered to go up there. I figured, what the heck, might be interesting, something different. It was basically just security, keeping the fort secure, making sure the buildings that were still there, nobody was vandalizing them. One interesting thing about Fort Holabird, it was the base for the U.S. Marshals. They had a little compound there. They had taken an old World War II barracks, they had renovated it, and they put a fence around it, and that's where a lot of white-collar criminals ended up. And one night when I was on duty at the gate, I was working overnight, I get a call from the police, the headquarters that we had set up, and they said, and because we used to stop people from coming in, we had to check their IDs. They said there's going to be 4 black SUVs coming in with flashing lights. Don't stop them. They're taking somebody down to the U.S. Marshal building. I said, okay. Sure enough, they came. Four vehicles come flying through. Right. Found out later it was one of the Watergate. I don't know if you know about Watergate. President Nixon, when he was president, some of his people broke into the Watergate Hotel, Democratic headquarters, and so one of those guys had been. In fact, I think there ended up 3 of them all total ended up at that U.S. Marshals facility, and they were just bringing them in one night. And I think it was John Dean, if I remember correctly. That was in September of 1974.
Right. So after your time at Fort Meade,
well, there was one other thing about Fort Meade.
Sorry.
Also, while I was there, there was an OPEC oil embargo. The OPEC nations, the nations that were supplying us with oil, we had supported Israel during what they called the Yom Kippur War. War broke out in 1973 during the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. And the U.S., Canada, Great Britain, France, we all supported Israel. Well, to try to get back at us, the OPEC nations, they decided they weren't going to send us any oil. So at that time, they weren't sure what was going to happen, if they'd have to send troops in to make sure our oil kept flowing, because most of the facilities over there in the Middle East were built by the Western nations, built the oil refineries and everything, and so they put us on alert in case we would have had to pack up and ship out. Well, that whole week I was on alert, I wasn't allowed to call home. And, my parents are wondering what's going on, So after the week went up, when things calmed down a little bit, we were allowed to call home, and I told them what happened. So that was sort of, it was interesting. I mean, it was a little scary too, you never knew. We could have got called one day and just had to pack up our stuff and be sent over to the Middle East, but luckily nothing ever happened.
Right. So, well, after your time at Fort Meade and Fort Holabird, all that, where were you sent next?
Alaska.
Okay, so.
Very interesting.
So, how long were you stationed in Alaska?
I was there for 1 year.
Right. So, what was it like being stationed in Alaska?
Very different. I arrived in December of '74, and that's a story in itself. I was supposed to fly out on a Sunday from Pittsburgh. From my town of Johnstown. I got a flight from Johnstown to Pittsburgh. I was supposed to fly out from Pittsburgh, and then Seattle, and then Anchorage. Well, there was a storm coming in from the Midwest. By the time I got to Pittsburgh, all flights had been canceled. So I'm like, oh, great. I'm supposed to be in Anchorage tonight, and here I am stuck in Pittsburgh. There's an Air Force reserve base there right near the Pittsburgh airport. So I thought, well, instead of paying for a hotel, I'll just hoof it over there and see if they can put me up for the night, and they were able to. So I get up Monday morning, go back to the airport. Well, your flight's going to go out, but it's not going to go out until later in the day. I'm like, oh, great. So I says, well, I explained the situation. I was in the military. I was supposed to be in Anchorage last night. They says, we'll give you a typed letter saying the reason you're late. So finally got out, Monday, and got to Anchorage like after midnight. Now it's early Tuesday morning, and again, I thought, well, I'm not going to report now. I'm just going to go to a hotel. And I went to a hotel. And the next morning, I got a cab to take me over to the base. And we're driving past like a mall, any of the malls around here. But I noticed in the parking lots there were the posts with these wires hanging out. I'm like, what is that? I couldn't imagine what that was. I asked the cab driver, I says, what's this? What's these posts with these wires hanging out? Well, if you look at the cars, and the cars all had a wire hanging out of the front of of the vehicles, out of their grill. When you went to the mall, especially in the wintertime, you'd plug your engine in to keep the engine warm. Otherwise, the oil and everything would just freeze up because it got very cold up there. I mean, the last 2 weeks I was there, it never got above 20 below zero. So that's what that was all about. And so then I got to the fort, and before they sent me up to where I was going to be stationed, I had an orientation about the weather, about the cold weather, how to protect yourself, how to not go out don't go take a walk in the woods by yourself and not tell anybody.
Right.
In fact, don't go out in the woods by yourself at all because of the wildlife. I mean, there's been reports, people would go out for a walk and never returned again, because there's bear. I mean, there's a lot of wildlife up there. And so, we had a 4-day orientation, and finally I was given my assignment and I was sent to a missile site. Again, like I said, this was the Cold War, so there were these Nike Hercules missiles. They were surface-to-air missiles, and they had sites in San Francisco, Chicago, some of the cities down in what we call the lower 48. But there were up in Alaska. They had 3 sites in Anchorage. 3 sites in Anchorage and 3 sites in Fairbanks.
Right.
One was out by the airport in Anchorage. One was out by the airport. One was across. There's a body of water there called Cook Inlet. There was one across on the other side of Cook Inlet. And then there was the one I was sent to, which was at the top of a mountain. I mean, we're talking mountain, not a hill, a mountain. This thing was very, I got into the van, threw all my stuff in, and we get out of Fort Richardson, we start up this windy hill. And we just keep going up and keep going up and keep going up. And I'm like, oh man, now I really ask myself, what did I get myself into here? But I got up there, and it was, like I said, it was beautiful up there when the weather was nice. I mean, you could look out, see all of Anchorage, all Fort Richardson, Elmendorf Air Force Base, Cook Inlet, and on a nice day, Mount McKinley, which was about 150, 200 miles away. You could see it from where we were at.
Wow.
I mean, it was just beautiful.
All right.
And I was sent up there as an MP for security purposes.
All right, so can you tell us how an anti-missile site works?
They're further up north in Alaska. They had what they called the DEW line. It was Defense Early Warning System. If they ever detected the Soviets at the time, planning an attack from Siberia, the radar there would pick it up, then our radar would pick it up, and then we had these missiles that they were in silos, and there was a track that came out of the silo, and the missile would come out of the silo, and then they'd be raised, and then they'd fire them off to knock the planes out of the sky. That was the purpose of it. Like I said, it was surface-to-air missiles, and that was the purpose of the Nike Hercules sites, to protect the U.S. from a possible Soviet attack.
Right. So, what kind of weapons and equipments did you get to use?
I learned basic M16. When I was in, that was the main weapon. Basic training, MP school, and even up in Anchorage, up in Alaska, we had M16s. As an MP, I also carried a .45 caliber pistol. That was, another thing that we had to learn, become proficient in. And as you can see, one of my things here, also grenades. that was in basic training. They taught us the proper way to, pull the pin of a grenade, proper way to throw it, and everything. But the pistol was, for an MP, the pistol was the main thing. I became pretty proficient in the use of that. Other weapons we had, nightstick.
Right.
Oh, sorry about that. The nightstick, most people think you use the nightstick to club people. Well, you really don't. If you hit them, you usually hit them behind their knees. That was more to get leverage on their arms, to try to subdue, a perp or somebody that was, intoxicated and causing problems. So those were the excuse me, the main weapons that I was, that I learned how to use while I was in.
Right. Can you tell us what like the average day in Alaska was like for you?
Well, for me, well, you want to what the day was like, depending on what time of the year it was. In the winter, sun wouldn't come up until about 10:30 in the morning, and then it would be gone by 2:30 in the afternoon. So it was a lot of darkness. Summer was just the opposite, though. It wouldn't set until sometimes maybe 1:30. Where I was at in Anchorage, the further north you go, the more it's different. Like up where the oil fields are, they have several months where the sun never shines, or in the summer where it never sets. But where I was at in Anchorage in the summer, like I said, it would come up. It would set maybe at 1:30 in the morning, be back up by 4:30 in the morning. I can remember right around the first day of summer in June, the longest day of the year, playing basketball, shooting basketball outside without any artificial light. The sun was still shining, and that got some getting used to, trying to get to sleep at night. We had barracks where there were two-man rooms, and my roommate and I, we used to have to put a blanket up on the window to keep the sun out, so we could go to get to sleep at night.
Right.
Watching Johnny Carson and the sun shining. It's just things like that. Things that 11:30 at night, you're watching TV and the sun's still shining. That just it took some getting used to.
Right.
In the winter, it was very, very cold. It could be very, very cold, especially where I was at. The missile site, again, being located on a mountain as it was, we got horrific winds. I mean, they clocked winds up there of 100 miles per hour sometimes.
Yeah.
And if a storm came through with a lot of snow, it would shut down the road, so nobody could get off the mountain or get up the mountain. And sometimes we could be a week up there without being able to get up or down the mountain. No mail, nobody could go to doctor's appointments or go downtown. Luckily, there was never a dire emergency where somebody had to get off the mountain right away.
Right.
I mean, I was just, I was lucky the year that I was there. During the winter, never had a situation like that. I have a picture somewhere in all these pictures that I brought of me standing. This was like in June, and I'm standing in front of a pile of snow. It's still about 10, 15 feet high. I mean, it took forever. Sometimes some of the snow didn't even melt. We're up on the mountain where we were at. It would just be there all year long.
Well,
but then, like I said, in the summer, it could get it can get up into the 70s. Even the 80s. They just told me the summer I was there, it was an unusually cool summer. It never got into the 80s.
right.
What was interesting, because of all the sunlight, people that had vegetable gardens, I mean, vegetables that you never saw, size of them were just enormous because they were getting constant sunlight,
Right.
For a good part of the day, So that was, like I said, interesting things like that. Wildlife, driving up to the mountain site, just like we see right-tailed deer around here in Pennsylvania, off the side of the road, we'd see moose, just grazing,
Right.
and it was different. And then one interesting thing that happened to me was me and three of the guys that I was with up there on the missile site. We went down to Anchorage one night. We just get down, spend some time in Anchorage. Well, at that night we were down there, President Gerald Ford was flying on his way to China, and he was stopping in Anchorage to give a speech and then stay overnight. And so we're walking around Anchorage. He says, "Let's go over and see if we can see the president." Hey, how often do you get a chance to see the president of the United States? So we go over to the hotel, and we were surprised there weren't that many people out there trying to see him. So they had from the entrance of the hotel to the room he was speaking in, they had it cordoned off.
Right.
And we walked in the hotel, and we just sort of worked our way up near the rope. And so the president comes through, and he's shaking hands, and I just stuck my hand out. He grabbed my hand, and I said, "Yeah, nice to meet you, Mr. President." He said, "Nice to meet you," and kept on going. So that became a topic of conversation. Hey, somebody from the missile site shook the president's hand. So that was interesting.
Right.
But and then there was one night there was a very slight earthquake. I was in my room. I wasn't on duty at the time. I was in my room, and I was reading, and all of a sudden we had a desk. My roommate and I, we had a desk. Things on the desk started shaking. I'm like, what's going on here? So, and I go to the door, open my door, and everybody else is coming out of their rooms. Hey, did you feel that? Yeah. And then we found out later it was a slight earthquake. It wasn't, there wasn't any damage or anything, but it was, I'd never experienced an earthquake before, so that was interesting.
Well, with the weather and events like that, what was your schedule like?
Schedule was like, it was, I could work 7 to 3, 3 to 11, or 11 to 7, because we had a gate outside of the missile site where we had to, it had to be manned. Again, we couldn't let anybody in unless they had the proper credentials, if they weren't supposed to be there. First of all, they weren't even supposed to be going up the mountain. There was a sign at the bottom of the hill, authorized vehicles only, U.S. military installation. So if anybody ignored that, then the next thing when they got to the top of the mountain, to the missile site, would be somebody at the gate. Never had any problems there, though. Nobody ever came up that wasn't supposed to. So, like I said, I could, be any of the shifts, and luckily the guard building was heated. Let me stand out there for 8 hours in 20 below zero weather, but it was heated, so it really wasn't that bad.
Right.
Like I said, we never had any problems there. Nobody ever came up. And one nice thing was, in the summer, the servicemen who actually would be the ones who would fire the missiles, they had to go to, I think it was Fort Hood, Texas at the time. Fort Hood, Texas, or Fort Sill, Oklahoma, I don't remember. They'd go down there for training because they couldn't launch any of the missiles and fire them from our site there because where Anchorage was. So they'd go down to Texas, and that's where they went for their training for a whole week. So, it'd just be the security people, the guys who worked in the mess hall, the administrative people, all the technical people were all gone. So a whole week it'd be real quiet. Well, not a lot going on.
Right. Well, like you just mentioned a bit earlier, you received an award during your service. Could you tell us more about that award, please?
Well, everybody that's in the service gets the National Service Medallion, Service Award. That's what I have here. This is for my proficiency in the pistol and rifle. I was considered a marksman. I don't remember exactly how the ranking. There's marksman, sharpshooter. I'm not exactly sure, and then also proficiency in grenade.
Right.
I got this grenade and rifle I received in basic training, and pistol in MP school.
Right. How did you stay in touch with your family during all of this?
Well, again, remember this was the 70s. There weren't cell phones or anything like that, computers. Right. Phone calls home, but a lot of letters, mostly letters. Occasionally I would call home. Being a big Pittsburgh Steeler fan, I happened to be in Alaska when Pittsburgh won its first Super Bowl against the Minnesota Vikings. So of course, we were watching the Super Bowl. It was I think 11 o'clock in the morning or something. Again, it wasn't, back then it wasn't on at 6 o'clock at night even here, but so up there it was I think it was 10 or 11 o'clock it came on. And I called home after that because, hey, the Steelers won the Super Bowl. And one of the guys that I was stationed with up there, he was from Minnesota, and him and I had a nice $50 bet. He goes, oh, the Steelers, they've never been, they're lousy. They haven't been in a Super Bowl or a NFL championship. I says, well, we'll see. So I says, you willing to make a bet? And he says, yeah, $50. Okay, so I ended up winning $50 off of that. But yeah, so it was mostly letters. Like I said, occasional calls because we had a phone on the up there at the site, and I would just reverse the charges and and call home. But it was very rare.
Right.
But something like the Pittsburgh winning Super Bowl, I had to call for that. and after the next day after I had shaken President Ford's hand, I had to call home to tell him about that.
Excuse me. With all of this going on, did you ever feel pressure or stress during your time with the MP and Army?
Like I said, when I was at Fort Meade, when there was that chance that we might go overseas, a little stress there because, again, there I would have, we didn't know what we would, encounter if we had to go overseas. Besides that, not really. I mean, now one of the things I didn't, that I didn't like to do when I was an MP at Fort Meade was there was off-base housing for a lot of the service people. And if you even talk to a civilian police officer, the worst call is a domestic violence call. Because you get there and you're trying to break them up, and usually it's the wife. You ask her, "Are you going to press charges?" And she would say no. And it's like, well, if they don't press charges, there's not a whole lot we could. Now if the husband was drunk, we could take him in, throw him in the jail for a night till he sobers up. But besides that, there wasn't a whole lot we could do. And so those were really tough. Those were really tough situations. And then also being an MP and being an enlisted man, when you got a fight broke out at the officers club, there's a captain or a colonel in there, causing problems, and here I come walking in, and I'm a specialist third class or something. I have to arrest the officer. That was a little touchy, but luckily that only happened once.
Right.
And then we always had to call an officer to come. We always had a first lieutenant, one or two first lieutenants on duty back at the police station. We'd have to call them to come over to the officers club. They're the ones who actually made the arrest, but we'd have to detain, like I said, a captain or a colonel, whatever, until an officer arrived. That you always felt, man, if this officer sobers up and remembers me, But again, they weren't all MPs, and they were other parts of the base, so they probably never would see me again.
Yeah. So what did you normally do when you were on leave?
When I was on leave in Fort Meade, I usually went back home for a couple days. Like I said, I lived in Johnstown, and from Fort Meade it was, I'm trying to remember, 2-hour drive, 3-hour drive. It used to be when I first got down there, it was a shorter drive because the speed limit was 70, and then when the oil embargo happened, they dropped all the speed limits down to 55, so that made it a little bit longer of a drive home. So when I was there, Fort Meade, Fort Holabird, I usually went home. Alaska, just down to Anchorage. Now, I did take 2 weeks leave, and I had a relative who lived in California, in Los Angeles. I took 2 weeks off and went down to visit her and her husband and her 3 boys. I went down to visit them, so that was nice. I was able to, I got to go to Disneyland, which I'd never been to before, and the beach, and Southern California beaches and everything. But it was usually just down to Anchorage for, go out and have a few drinks at a bar or something,
Right.
Nothing spectacular. There was one concert that played up there, Fleetwood Mac. I remember they wanted to see them there.
Nice. Very nice. What ultimately made you decide to leave the military, though?
I don't know. Well, first of all, I was disillusioned with police work. By then I didn't want to, my idea of getting into a career as a police officer, a lot of paperwork, and I didn't expect that. And I thought maybe it was just the military, but when I was at Fort Meade, I talked to the Anne Arundel County Police, and they said the same thing. There's an incident, you go back and you spend hours sometimes just filling out paperwork, and I thought, this isn't for me. Just something I didn't want to do. As far as the Army itself, I don't know. I was thinking of staying in, but then I thought, oh man, I have 3 years in. At the time, the GI Bill, I thought I could go to college, go to school, which I eventually did. I don't know, after 3 years, I think I just had enough,
Right.
Nothing against the military. I've told my son, Chris, I says, I think everybody should be required to go in the military for at least 2 years, male or female, because it makes you grow up, for one thing.
Right.
Makes you responsible for yourself. So many people, well, that's not my fault. Well, you got sometimes you got to take responsibility. But I don't know, after 3 years, I thought I wanted to do something else, and I knew it wasn't police work. So I had always been interested in TV and radio. That was my other interest when I was in high school, was law enforcement and mass media, if you want to call it that. And so I thought, well, get out and see what happens. And I went back and I ended up getting a job, not as a reporter or anything, but getting a job at a newspaper. That's where I had worked before I went into the service, and they were required to give me my job back. So I went back there, and then eventually I ended up coming to Penn State, going to school here.
Right. So what did you take away from your time in the military?
I grew up. I was, when I went in, I just turned 20 in October of '72, and I was, not that I was real wild or anything, but I I just think it made me grow up because, I had to do a lot of things on my own, make decisions on my own, no parents involved, and responsibility. Responsibility for myself, responsibility, especially when you're working as a team. That was one thing you learned in basic training and at the MP school, working as a team. They would give us activities to do that we had to work together. There'd be 5, 6 of us, and you learn teamwork. So you learn, okay, I'm responsible for this. If I don't get this done, the whole team loses out, and so you didn't want to be the one that, caused the team to fail. So responsibility and growing up, I think those are probably the 2 main things. And again, it gave me an idea of what police work was like, and nothing. Like I said, I have nothing against the police, but I knew it wasn't for me.
Right.
I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah. So, excuse me, but was it hard to transition? Sorry. Was it hard to transition back into civilian life after your service?
Not really, because again, I went back to the job I had at the newspaper in Johnstown that I'd had when I went in. So it really wasn't that hard. I mean, and luckily I had family and friends who helped me, and the biggest transition was the first week or so, because I had said earlier, my last 2 weeks in Alaska, it never got, I'm talking during the day, it never got above 20 below zero. I landed in Pittsburgh, went to Seattle and then Pittsburgh. I land, it's 35 degrees. It's 55 degrees warmer now than what it was when I left Alaska, and I thought, wow, I'm warm. I'm taking off my coat and everything, and everybody's people have coats on. And here I am rolling up my sleeves, and it took me about a week to get used to the climate again, because I had been up in that cold for so long.
Well, where did you go to college, if I may ask?
Penn State. I had. They were a little bit younger than me, but I knew them from our church and stuff. There was several guys that I knew that they, in fact, when I came back, I coached the church basketball team, and two of the players there ended up going to Penn State, and one or two of their friends, and I just got to know them because they'd come to the basketball games, and they went to Penn State, and I applied several places, Syracuse, Pitt, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I was looking for a journalism school, broadcast journalism school, and I liked the program that Penn State had, and then, like I said, I also knew people there, so it just was something that I sort of went that way and was accepted, and ended up here at Penn State then.
Right, so, sorry, but did you make any close friendships while you served?
There were 1 or 2 guys that I got to know in Alaska. I somewhat keep in touch with them. We've sort of lost a little touch, in the last couple years. I haven't heard from them. I know if you're in combat, they say you make friends like that. I was never in combat, but there were several. There were two guys in particular that I can remember that I stayed in contact with for some time. But the last couple of years, I've lost contact with them, or they didn't return letters or whatever. So there's really nobody now that I can say.
All right, sorry, but what was your career when you graduated from Penn State?
Broadcast journalism. I became a videographer. At the time when I started, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, radio. I wasn't even sure if I wanted TV. I thought maybe radio. But I took my first class. You probably don't do this anymore, but you had to take a film class where you had to go out and shoot film.
I believe we still do that.
You still do that? Is that one? Okay, I thought maybe since everything's video, well, now you don't even use videotape anymore.
Right.
I thought maybe you didn't have to do that. But I had a film class, and going back and splicing film, and like, wow, this is neat. You can do things with this. I thought this might be where I want to be, behind the camera. Well, and then when I got my first videotape course,
right.
What I could do with videotape, add sound effects, add music, edit it the way I want. I just thought, oh, this is what I want to do, and did it for 32 years.
Right. So did your military experience influence your thinking about war or the military in general?
I have respect for the military. I mean, I have any respect for anybody, especially now it's all volunteer. Anybody that goes in, I just think, very, very highly of them. And again, personal opinion thrown in. I think everybody should be required to serve at least 2 years.
Right.
But no, I have a lot of high respect for anybody that serves. I don't want to see a war. Nobody wants to see a war. Even people that are in the military don't want to. But sometimes, somebody or something can push you to a point where you have no other choice.
Right.
I mean, you may try other avenues, negotiations, whatever, but there are some things, sometimes it's just inevitable. But
Right.
again, that would be, to me, that's the last resort.
So how did your service and experiences affect your life?
Again, it made me grow up, made me more responsible, I think, more respect for the military, and not that I didn't have it before I went in, but a lot more for it after I came out, for people that are in the military. And I'm just proud of my service. I just, if I would have had to go over to the Mideast back then, that was just something I would have had to do, and I would have done it,
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover in this interview so far?
I'm trying to think. I think we covered everything. I pretty much, like I said, at each place I was at, Fort Meade, it was possibly getting called up for, going over the Middle East. Fort Holabird, it was one of the Watergate conspirators that's coming through.
Right.
Alaska, meeting the president. Minor earthquake. Fort Gordon, Georgia. Just with the Marines and everything.
Right.
It's all but everything. I think everything I told you is pretty much my military experience, and I wouldn't give it up for the world. I mean, if it wasn't for the military, I probably wouldn't have come to Penn State, because what got me here was the GI Bill.
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. This is a photo. Everybody that was in basic training had a photo taken. It ended up in this book it ended up in a book that they gave us, but we were also able to get copies of these pictures made to give to family and friends. Again, just like in basic training, when we were finished with getting close to the end of our training, they took pictures of all of us. I don't recall if I have a book on that or not. I don't even remember if they had a book for it. I think they do. I'd have to look my stuff here, but. Again, you could get as many copies of these as you wanted to give to family and friends, right, just to show you and show me in all my MP gear. This was up in Alaska. This was the missile battery that I was at. Down below the site where I was actually living is where they launched the missiles from. This shot was taken from that location. It's just down the road a little bit from the actual site. Right. It was. As you can see, the sun was shining. It was a real nice picture that I was able to take. This is a shot looking up to the mountain. If you look real close, right there at the top of this peak, you can see one of the domes covering the
yeah, I think I see it.
Yeah, it's up there. This was taken, obviously, during the fall of the year, before there was any snow on the mountain and stuff. But yeah, that was a shot from down below, from Fort Richardson up to the missile site.
This is a black and white photo. Is this the same?
Yeah, it's the same missile site. As you can see, it was the writing that was taken by a guy that I was up there with. He was just starting to dabble in photography. The other guy who took some of these other ones, the real nice ones in color, he had done photography for a while. This guy was just getting started, and he
Nice.
gave me a shot, gave this photo to me to take with me when I left.
You mentioned the book. Is it this one?
Yes, it is. Inside, there's pictures of all the men that were in my unit and going through basic training, plus they took a lot of shots when we were out in the field, the rifle range, wherever we were at. There was always a cameraman around us. They were constantly taking pictures. Of all the candid pictures they took, I only found myself in 2 of them.
This looks like basic training. Is it?
It is. It's after we went through the induction center, had our haircuts, got our shots, and did the physical and everything, and everybody's moving into their barracks, where your new home for 8 weeks. In case there was ever use of gas in war, they wanted us to get somewhat used to it. We'd go into a building with our gas masks on,
Right.
and then they'd release the gas, and then we had to take them off and then see how long we could last and then run out of the building. So that was very interesting. I remember coughing a lot, and my eyes watering a lot after that. But it was just something so you knew what the gas might be like. I mean, it wasn't anything lethal. It wasn't going to kill us or anything, but just get us used to what it might be like if we were ever gassed.
Right.
And how to properly use the gas.
Any reason we're focusing on this photo?
Yes, I'm in it.
Wait, which one are you?
I'm the one right there. We were marching probably to the rifle range or something. As I said earlier, there was somebody always taking pictures of us. I mean, it was constant. It never ended. Whether we were in a classroom or out in the rifle range, at the gas chamber, wherever we were at, there was always somebody taking a picture. So I went through the book, and this is one of the 2 photos I was able to find of myself. There might be more, but I never took the time to really look at each person in all these photos, because some of the photos, there's a lot of people in them. But I just figured that was interesting.
Was that your baton you used during your time with the MP?
Yes, it is. This is one of the things I was allowed to keep. I had this was given to me in MP school, and then I had it when I was at Fort Meade, Fort Holabird, and up in Alaska. Right. Because of all the nicks and everything, I guess they just let everybody that was in the MPs keep their baton.
Nice.
Again, like I said, people think that these are made to club people over the heads. They're not. They're to subdue people, using it to lock their arms up, or if they're really have to get them down, hit the back of their knees. That'll knock almost anybody over.
And these were your hats during your service?
Correct. This hat here, this is what you'd wear with your dress uniform. As you saw in my photo from basic training, this is the hat that I had on at the time. This here is the military police hat. Again, when I was dressed fully, this is what I'd wear. Now on duty, we didn't wear these. We had other hats, but this is the dress uniform for an MP. If we had a parade or something that we were in, the MPs would wear the white hats.
This was your jacket during your service, and where exactly was this?
This was the whole time I was in the Army. This is standard for everybody in the military. This is the Army jacket. I mean, that's OD green, olive drab green.
Right.
Everything at the time, everything was OD green. The patches that I have on the shoulder here and the one on the other side, they're from Alaska. And then these 2 patches were what I had on when I was at Fort Meade, Maryland.
Does the A just stand for Army, or?
Yeah, I think First Army. Again, it's been so long. I think that's what it was for.
Right.
And this was, I'm assuming, either Fort Meade or some. Like I said, it's been so long, it's hard to remember. If you go back to the full shot of the jacket, this was not on my jacket when I was in the Army. This is something I put on after I got out, because you're not allowed to put patches on that aren't authorized, and that state of Alaska thing was not authorized. But when I got out, I figured, hey, I had bought the flag. I figured and I wore this jacket for a number of years after I got out of the service, because it fit real well and it kept me warm. So I just put that patch on.
It's amazing. Looks like your hat, is it?
No, this is an armband that we wore.
Oh.
If you remember my photo from MP school, we wore these armbands. This was the one, obviously, from the patch. You can see this is the one I had in Fort Meade, Maryland. I had another one in Alaska, but I think if I remember right, we had to give those back, but this one I was allowed to keep.
Did you wear this on your left arm or your right arm?
Left arm, I think. We'd have to look at the photo. I'm pretty sure it was the left arm.
These photos looked like they were taken at a relatively peaceful time. When were these?
This was when I was at Fort Meade, Maryland. One day, when a bunch of us had off, we were given the opportunity to go out on a boat on the Chesapeake Bay. So obviously the photo you're holding, that's me, and then I'm in the center here, and these are some of the guys that I was in the unit with. Nice. We just went out. We were able to do some fishing, and just a very relaxing day. In fact, we actually took off from the Naval Academy in Annapolis. All these Army guys coming out onto the Naval Academy, and they took us out on a boat, and that was just something pleasant to do.
It must have sounded like a really fun time.
Oh, it was, very much so.
And here, you ended up in a newspaper.
Correct. Several times. The local store in Johnstown, Gloucester Brothers, this department store. They saw it in the paper, and they cut it out and sent it to my parents when I got promoted. And then there's another one I have when I got sent to Alaska while I was up in Alaska. So yeah, it was nice that they recognized me that way.
Local celebrity for a
Yeah,
bit.
for one day in the paper.
Well, Jeffrey, I'd like to thank you for this interview and for your
Yes,
service.
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you coming in.